we're going to be joined on the line with Michael Swain. In terms of this conversation, Michael Swain being the Executive Director of Freedom of Religion South Africa, or 4SA, and today we're talking about the Prevention of Hate Crimes and Combating of Hate Speech Bill. It's a bill commonly known as the Hate Speech Bill. Parliament met on the bill twice last week, namely Tuesday the 31st of Jan and Wednesday the 1st of Feb. Michael, it's very interesting to see the movement that's taking place. Obviously, State of the Nation happening very soon. But before we look at what happened in those two meetings, perhaps let's just start with a very short recap of what the bill is all about, please, Michael.
Well, the bill intends to criminalize two things. One is hate crimes, which, again, I think we don't really have a problem with, because essentially it's going to codify the common law that already applies. So, for example, if you murder a woman because she's a woman, that's an exacerbating factor and you'll get a heavier sentence. But the real problem is the hate speech component, because this bill proposes criminalizing hate speech. And in simple language, this is what it actually says. It's any expression, which is speech, or maybe a post you might put on Facebook or a bumper sticker, that incites harm, and number two, promotes or propagates hatred against three, a group of specifically listed people in the bill. And if you're found guilty, you can face a jail sentence of up to 8 years in prison.
Wow. So, Mr. Michael Swain, when it comes to this bill, so what are 4SA's concern regarding the bill?
Well, the main concern we have is that it's very loose in terms of how it frames up hate speech. And remember, we've said before that the wider you define hate speech, the less free speech you have. And unless you're very clear as to what will or will not be considered hate speech, one of the things which is a very significant impact of it is that you self-censor. You don't want to say something which might land you in jail, for example. And the problem is this, that there's a very loose definition of hate speech in this bill. So, for example, the degree of harm, it's only substantial harm that you have to basically prove, not gross harm or grievous harm. Remember, in the Papuda definition of hate speech, it has to be a speech which is like really vilifying. It's denigrating. It's, in other words, you have to really say something pretty harsh and horrible. But here, the test is basically almost a theoretical one, because you don't even have to harm anybody in reality. Your words just have to have the potential to harm people. So literally, it could be, could your words possibly have resulted in substantial, oh, and by the way, emotional harm is one of the categories. So in other words, hurt feelings. Could your words possibly have hurt the feelings of somebody else? And again, understand this, that if you do that, this is not a civil offense. This is not like Papuda or the Equality Act, where if you are found to be guilty of hate speech under that particular act of Parliament, then you're going to get a sanction maybe of, say, a fine, or it could be a forced apology, or, I mean, there are various other things that they can make you do. But here, we're talking about a jail sentence. And so, the types of harm are very loose. There's psychological harm. There's social harm. What is social harm? There's no definition of these things in the bill. Economic harm. We are unclear, and the bill does not make it clear what these are. And of course, that loose definition is very problematic, because it means that you cannot be sure what you say may or may not be considered to be hate speech, but it's broad enough to make you realize that actually you could very easily get caught in this net.
Sure. This is really a tricky one. For those who've just joined us, we're chatting to Michael Swain, Executive Director from Freedom of Religion South Africa, also known as 4sa.org.za, and it's about the hate speech bill. So, again, just making sure that I'm understanding you correctly, the bill wants to make it a crime that can land you in jail for up to 8 years for saying something that is, number one, harmful or incites harm without having to prove it resulted in anything happening in reality. Number two, promotes or propagates hatred against a group of people specifically listed in the bill. So now that you've covered that problem with the first element, harm, What about the other two elements, promoting or propagating hatred against a group of people specifically listed in the bill? Do these other two elements also suffer the same problems?
Yes, and absolutely they do. The bill doesn't define what promote or propagate hatred actually means. I mean, hatred is already quite a difficult concept to define, but it's proposing that anything you say, display, or share that could potentially result in substantially hurt feelings, because that's what emotional harm would be, that propagates some form of undefined hatred against a group of people listed in the bill, that could be a crime. And that brings us to the next problem, the groups of people. Now, the bill is proposing certain groups of people. There are lists, and they're going to choose from the lists as to who's going to be protected. But some of these groups of people include, for example, like sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and sex characteristics, none of which are defined in the bill. So again, you've got very open-ended categories of people who could actually claim that there's been hate speech against them. And we know, particularly when we look at the categories that we've just considered, that those are really potentially where the most problems can arise, particularly for people of faith.
Oh, so when it comes to, I know that from previous conversation, 4SA said that this bill would make it easier to go to jail than to apologize. It sounds like this is still the case, is it?
Well, absolutely. As I said before, the PAPUDA itself has a very narrow definition of hate speech. Remember, we talked about the Quilani case, which the Constitutional Court decided, and they took the very wide definition that was in the original PAPUDA bill, the Equality Act, and they made it considerably narrower, so that you have to show, for example, that you have advocated hatred and there is a direct correlating incitement to do harm, which is often physical harm, by the way. Now, here, this is very loose. Again, categories like emotional harm are here. It doesn't have to be highly detrimental or derogatory or vilifying the speech that you make. It just has to cause substantial harm objectively, if you like, or even subjectively.
Sure.
It can be theoretical. And don't forget, this is something which will put you in prison. This is not a light thing. It's not a light thing to be taken to court at any level, but it's certainly a very significant and serious thing if you can be taken to court and literally end up in Pollsmoor for up to 8 years.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Michael, the one question is, what happened at those two parliamentary meetings with regard to the hate speech, and what are some of those things that you as 4SA saw, and what do we need to know about?
Well, one of the last concerns we have is that you would think there would be exemptions, like very solid exemptions to this crime. For example, religious speech, bona fide religious speech, preaching, propagating the gospel would not be at all touched, nor would journalism, nor would artistic expression. But all these exemption clauses are very, very vague as well. In other words, it effectively says that you're not guilty of a crime of hate speech unless you've committed hate speech, which is actually no real defense at all. So look, here's the good news. It's likely to be passed in Parliament. There's another meeting coming up on the 21st of February. And at that time, it will then go forward to the National Council of Provinces, which is the second House of Parliament. And if passed, then it goes to the President. But when it goes to the NCOP, the National Council of Provinces, there will be an opportunity to comment again. And we want to really, really say, like we did last time, make your voices heard. When this comes up for further public comment, it hasn't been up for public comment, by the way, recently. We've just been in Parliament. We've been trying to do what we can there. But when you get the chance to make your voice heard, please speak up, because otherwise we will be left potentially with a law that has really the potential to cause quite significant levels of havoc amongst people of the faith community, simply for expressing views of their sincerely held faith and belief. So get ready for that. And we will, of course, keep you informed. You can always go to our website, forsa.org.za. You can go to our Facebook page. We've got a YouTube channel. So we will keep you informed, but please keep your eye on this matter and be ready to respond at the appropriate moment.
Michael Swain, great to chat to you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you and the rest of the team at 4SA do. And we'll definitely keep our finger on that pulse. Thanks to you keeping us informed. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks so much.